To us, magic sounds like this extraordinary thing, pulling a rabbit out of the hat, coming out of nowhere. But it's here, it's real, and the more that we are open to the unseen, to the energies of this world, to abundance and manifesting, to calling in and growing, the more we'll be able to call magic into our lives. Join me as I share stories, wisdom, and curiosity around connecting with your higher frequency, tapping into the synchronicities of the universe, and opening up to the unseen possibilities that this world has to offer. I am your host, Dayna Faye, and this is the Ordinary Magic Podcast. All right, welcome back to Ordinary Magic, everyone. Today, I am so excited to be joined by psychic medium Brandi Martinez. Hi, Brandi.
Hello, thanks for having me, Dayna.
Yeah, I'm so excited we got connected. I had no idea that you were locally here living in the greater Madison area. And I've heard a little bit about your story, and I'm so excited for our listeners to hear your story today. So I'm going to quickly introduce you, and then we'll dive on in. Brandi is an ethical and professional psychic clairvoyant and medium with over a decade of experience. She's trusted and respected, and she studied in the Berkeley lineage and graduated from the Madison, Wisconsin Psychic Institute. She also holds degrees in sociology, women's studies, and LGBT studies from UW-Madison. She is Reiki level 1 and 2 certified and learned tarot under powerhouses such as Teresa Reed and Nancy Hendrickson. Her knowledge of modern natal astrology was acquired under Sam Reynolds and Rebecca Gordon. Brandi's work reflects an emphasis on empowerment via education. Brandi's goal is to hold space for folks' individual journeys and share knowledge to encourage the healing and strengthening of our communities and ecosystems. She hopes to work with more archaeologists, historians, First Nation communities, spiritual and thought leaders, educators, and scientists in order to apply social justice to the forefront of our historical and current lenses. Wow, Brandi, that is quite the resume. I am so excited. I have my moon and sun earrings on for
Beautiful.
You today. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So tell me your story of how you got into mediumship and where it all started.
Sure. So mediumship is not something that I decided I wanted to do for a living. It just kind of fell in my lap. And I've learned over the years that all these synchronicities that have occurred in my life have unfolded for a reason. So it makes sense now, but it maybe didn't in the past. And so as a child, I did have experiences. I had clairsentience or claircognizance, which is where you just know something and you don't know really how you know it. I had knowledge of things that were adult knowledge that I should not have necessarily had knowledge of. And it was funny because adults in my life, my relatives would always tease me because I was the I know dat kid. I'd always say like, I know dat. And I had experiences at a young age and I didn't really have anyone to really talk to about it. Even though we were a religious household, we weren't necessarily practicing like visiting church and things like that. But I would see a gentleman in my room at night, and I was born in the 80s. And this person had like late 60s, early 70s clothing on. So in my mind, he was the Scooby-Doo man because he looked kind of like, you know, one of those people from Scooby-Doo, the villain that they catch at the end and unmask, right? And
yeah.
I mean, so I would experience things like at a young age. I also had quite a few experiences in my tweens, like right around 12 or 13, around the passing of my great aunt, who to me was my maternal figure, really. Oh. And that really kind of occurred in hospice, like when she was passing from cancer. And during the phase after that in my teen years, it was just kind of a whirlwind. And so I didn't actually tap into those abilities. And the more people I meet with abilities like this, or I really do think everyone can do what I do, but I would say the more people that I'm meeting who have developed or strengthened those skills, I'm finding that during their teen years, they also didn't have a ton of access to it as well. When I moved away to college at UW-Madison, that was a really interesting time in my life. I was the first person in my family to go to school, and I didn't know. I mean, this was a time where pretty much we had no knowledge of the effigy and burial mounds that were all over Madison. I mean, Madison was basically built on top of very sacred ceremonial site. Okay. It was full of these beautiful ancient mounds. And we're talking about ancient, not necessarily the First Nations people that exist today. It's people before that. So that energy being there, I had all these experiences that were happening to me in the dorms when I lived on the Lakeshore dorms. And then afterwards, even after I moved off campus, I was experiencing things, and it just like it kept getting louder and louder. Coming from academia, coming from that very science-based mindset, right? Logical reasoning kind of thinking. I thought I was crazy. I thought I was schizophrenic. And, it starts to show up in your 20s. And so I thought, okay, this is really scary. And, knowing how women and the mental health industry don't always have the best history together, like we don't have the best track record, right? It was really scary for me to go and talk to someone and ask for help. But I needed to face that fear because I didn't want to, find out other things the hard way. And so I went to go and meet with this therapist. And I asked her quite a few questions, and she asked me quite a few questions. And she said, you're not really displaying anything remotely near a psychosis like that. And there are just some things we can't exactly explain. And so if anything, I think we should actually see if we can find a mentor for you. And honestly, this woman changed my life. And I'm so glad that I went and I spoke with her, because if it had been someone else, who knows what would have happened. And so at that exact time, it's just bizarre, but at that exact time, I walked into my first metaphysical shop. It's still there at Mimosa on State Street in Madison.
Yes, it is still there. It might have moved on State Street,
yes,
but it's still on State Street.
Yep. Yeah. And this is back when it was like in that little building where Earwax Records was and all that stuff. And I actually had met the owner, Ashley Levy. I don't think she owned it at the time. And I had no idea that she was involved in this metaphysical stuff. And so when I went in, I said, do you guys have anyone that does mentoring or anything like that? And she says, well, we don't. But one of our psychics that does readings here on occasion, she is actually starting a school for psychics. And I was like, really? And so I was kind of checking her out a little bit. Her name is Patty B. And she had been practicing as a psychic for 30 years. She learned all of her skills out in Colorado. I think she lived in Boulder, if I remember. And so she actually went to psychic school out there and studied. And she ended up she was in school to be a therapist. And she wanted to work with people who had PTSD and like significant traumas. And so while I was studying with her, she was working on getting her, qualifications and credentials for that work as well. I couldn't have found a better mentor to work with, because she held such great space for me during that time when I had so much anxiety. I just wanted to sleep. I just didn't feel like a normal person, whatever normal means. And so I just wanted to like be able to have a calm nervous system during this time,
Yeah.
And I remember towards the end, I studied with her for like 3 years. And towards the end of my studies with her, she goes, let's get you to read for someone. Let's get you to try it. And I was like, I really don't want to do that. I don't, no interest whatsoever. And she's like, no. So she's like, I'll make sure it's someone who is safe to read for and stuff. Cause I'm new to all this. And so she screened a couple of people that she knew, asked them to come in and sit with me. And I read for them, and it was just like incredible. I mean, it was, you have this experience, this exchange of energy when you're connecting to someone like that. And when I saw that, when I experienced that, it did something to me, and it made me feel as though, okay, there might actually be a little bit more to this than I had assumed. Because, everything that we know about psychics and clairvoyants and mediums, we see on TV, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or we'll read their books, right? And I didn't want that. I didn't want that for my life. I just wanted to exist and have some sort of normalcy.
Yeah.
So.
I have like at least 3 questions that are coming up with this story of yours.
Yeah.
So, and I love this. This conversation is so timely because I just had an epiphany. This podcast is called Ordinary Magic, and I thought it was to bring magic into our everyday ordinary life. But what I'm realizing is that I want to make magic ordinary. Like,
Yeah.
and I feel like you're a really great person to make it ordinary. Like, this is an ordinary thing. Like you said, anyone can do this. It just matters how practiced you are.
Yeah.
And maybe we all start out at different levels, let's say, when we're born. So what experiences were you having when you first moved to college? Like you did say, I was having a lot of anxiety. I thought I was going crazy. Is there something specific? Was that man from the 60s still visiting you? Or like, what was happening?
Yeah. So when I moved to UW-Madison, it's so interesting because my thinking spots, I found out later on, were next to very prominent mountains that were very significant.
Wow.
And I didn't even know that they were there. And then one of the things that happened, I would see this little girl in the hallway at night, and she was Native American. And I mean, she never said anything, but she would just look at me and stand there and stare. She's wearing like this really, wasn't something we would wear. You know, everyone was like in their little Victoria's Secret pink and stuff like that back then. You know what I mean? So I'd see her, you know, down the hallway. And then I'd also experienced my roommate. She was sitting on our futon. It was one of those futons that's raised up off the ground, has legs, you know, wood ones. And she's sitting on the futon with her feet up, you know, and her book on her knees. And I'm sitting in the desk next to it, you know, studying. And we're just having like a normal study day. It's totally quiet. And all of a sudden, the futon slides forward like 4 feet, like upright, not like it was opening, right? And it's one of those.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And it's one of those futons you had to lift up to like open. It wasn't opening. The whole thing slid forward as like kind of a couch, you know? And we just like locked eyes, and then it slid back while she was sitting on it. And, and we just like, we were in shock. And the thing is, she's a very science-minded like individual. I was pre-med at the time. She just didn't believe in that stuff. And I mean, I had experiences like that at a younger age, but I kind of forgot about them. And it was so funny because we just kept working. Like it hadn't even happened. Like we just kept, like, that was weird. And then after that, when I moved off campus, I had started seeing black shadow figures, and that's not always a good thing, you know, and my bed was shaking at night, and I moved out of that apartment thinking this place is like not a place I want to hang out. So I moved to a brand new apartment building in McFarland. And I remember I'm like, this is going to be great. You know, I've never lived in a brand new building in my entire life. Right. And that was the most haunted place I could have ever like chosen. And it was more so because I always had felt like there was something in the like woods or up the hill right across from my apartment building. I was like, there's something important there that I, you know, and then nothing was marked or anything like that. And I'm like, I know it's important. And I kept seeing this woman, and she would come and stand in the hallway and scream at night about the bones. And I was so confused. I had no idea what she was talking about. She was Indigenous, but she looked very different to what we would consider First Nations kind of culture within this like post-contact, which is like, you know, post-colonial type of a culture. So she looked very different than what I was used to, almost more so closer to like Aztecan or Mayan culture. And so it was really confusing to me. And this was probably in 2010 when I had decided I've had enough of this. I can't sleep. This woman is screaming at me. I feel bad for her. You know, I feel her sadness and her anger, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. I don't know how I'm supposed to use this. I don't know how to identify anything that is of substance here. And it turns out all of these things were happening. It's like all of these things were starting to unfold during that time that I wasn't aware of until 2020. And so I finally kind of in 2018, 2019, my husband now goes, you know, you got to stop putting these abilities aside. You should really allow yourself to go back to the work that you were, you know, started, because I had started a business after I had studied at the Psychic Institute, just because I wanted to have the ability to be a part of something that felt like this positive change. My day job at the time was in finance. Like, couldn't be farther from
opposite.
And so, you know, here I am working in finance, I had a really great 12-year career in finance. I did really well for myself, but something was always missing. And I felt like I was always hustling and working from this scarcity mindset and just stressed out all the time and really addicted to work, you know? And around 2018, that's when my now husband said, I had taken a small break from doing the psychic work because I had gone through a divorce and I had moved and I was going through a lot at the time. And he goes, you keep trying to ignore these things that are happening, but they're happening for a reason. You have to try to figure out what to do with this. And I was like, yeah, I agree. But also like, I don't really want to be this person who's on TV or, how
stereotypical.
how we think of a psychic. And he's like, well, you don't have to do it that way. So I started going back and investigating some of the experiences I had to try to understand like maybe the history of the area, or maybe there's something more to like this woman who was screaming about the bones, And I learned that I was actually in this apartment building that had been part of a cleared subdivision where there was a clear line of burial mounds that had gone through it. And across the street in the woods where I had felt that energy, there were unmarked burial mounds. And I only found that out recently because I made friends with an archaeologist who specifically studies mound systems. And a lot of those mounds are sacred and protected. They don't want to advertise them because they don't want people turning them into touristy places, ruining them, desecrating them. We already had issues 100 years ago when folks were really building up the city of Madison, where they would dig up those mounds and take stuff from them. And it's just, just awful stuff. And so it made sense to me now why this woman was screaming, because in 2015, there was also a construction company that had owned a parcel of land just 2 blocks away from that apartment building. And they were mining the earth in that area. And the entire area that they have mined, there is just one small section of mounds in the middle. And they were trying to actually lobby to break policy so that federal protections for mounds and cemeteries were no longer existed. And so this woman was coming to me and screaming about it because she was so upset. And I didn't know 2 blocks away that there was this private company that was digging them up and like endangering them and trying to change all of this stuff. And so it's like all of the pieces of the puzzle are starting to kind of come together for me in a personal perspective, because a lot of these ways that folks had survived in our area for millennia. I mean, we're not even talking about like 2,000 years. We're talking about thousands, of years. It was based upon conservation and appreciation for our resources. And in the area in particular where I was living, there was a lot of damage that had been done to, if we even look at the lakes now, we have blue algae and things like that growing. Yeah. So it's been very eye-opening for me, because it's not just about the bones, it's not just about that. It's about the sacredness of how we're protecting and caring for the things around us, and how like we are nourished by those things. But when it's gone, it's gone. Like we're damaging it to a point where it's going to be gone. So
now you're connecting your psychic abilities and work to the ecosystem and to the ceremonial grounds that are here.
Yeah.
How do we solve this? You know what I mean? Like, it's an issue.
And exactly. And I think it's more so about how we're treating our natural resources. And this is not anything that would have come out of my mouth 10 years ago. This is not something that I really had at the forefront of my mind until I started having these experiences where these energies were coming forward. They had some sort of traumatic issue that needed to be expressed. And then now I'm like doing the research to try to understand the context. And so all I can do as a person is just try to put the pieces together and help where I can. But I'm just one person. And so solving the problems is not something that I would be able to specialize in necessarily. But I'm here to help however I can. And so around that time of 2018, 2019, when I started learning all these things, I started also broadening some of my skills. So I learned tarot, I learned astrology, just because I love acquiring different understandings of symbology and different perspectives. And it's just been a really interesting experience. And then here last year in 2022, I decided, okay, I think that I've had enough of working in the financial sector. And it was really scary for me, but I decided to do this full time. Like I decided, okay, I'm going to offer readings. I'm going to teach. I'm going to mentor full time. And it's been a completely eye-opening experience. I'll never look back. It's been so rewarding. And it's definitely been, yes, it's been a challenge, but it has been so worth it. I'd rather do this for myself than do this for someone else, basically,
Yes. And now that you've taken that step to go full-time entrepreneurship, to work on your crafts and share your offerings, your gifts, to teach, to do readings, what would you tell yourself 5 years ago? Would you do it different?
I probably would have done it sooner. I probably would have given myself more of a voice. I still struggle with speaking out because I have this need to make sure that I have everything factually perfect. And the thing that I've learned more than anything is our form of how we learn, our information, our spirituality, it's dynamic and it changes, it evolves with experience. And so rather than feeling like I need to get everything perfect and exact on how I speak, I realized that listening and receiving information and being in tune is one thing, but taking that action is another. And so I probably would have jumped in sooner. I probably would have been more vocal sooner. And I'm still kind of battling with that part because I would love to write. I would love to be able to do that. But every time I write, I'm just like, no one's going to want to hear this. And then I just delete it all or I rip it up, And so I think that if I would be able to do things differently, I would have encouraged myself to jump into that spiritual side a little bit deeper, like my own personal type of whatever a ritual is or whatever a manifestation is. I would have jumped into that much sooner, and I would have wanted to express and communicate those things with other people sooner.
Yeah. I am quickly interrupting this episode to tell you about my human design offerings. Are you wanting to learn more about what your human design is all about? I am able to help you apply it to your life and start living your design today. I offer a human design audio guide, which is a great entry level into your human design. We go over the most important layers, which are your energy type, strategy, authority, your biggest gift in this world, your profile, and your life theme. I also offer a full 90-minute human design reading over Zoom, and that includes a very robust document that you get to take home as well. The full reading are for people who know they want to dive deep right away, or people who have already started their human design journey and want to start applying it to their life. You can find your human design audio guide or the full human design reading on my website at daynafaye.com. That's DAYNAFAYE.com. I hope to connect with you soon. And for the listeners out there who are on their own spiritual journey, when you do have those insecurities of like, oh, I need to have it right, or I need to be able to explain to someone my knowing, even though it's a knowing and I can't really explain it. Do you have any exercise or some way to pump yourself up to just put one foot in front of the other and take action anyway?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So you're talking about like this concept of knowing, and I think that comes from this need to feel like validation or feel like accuracy. And really, when it comes to accuracy, there's not like a scientific method that has proven spirituality necessarily. Like we're working on understanding neuroscience, working on understanding what consciousness is. And so we really don't totally understand how that works yet. And I don't know if we ever will in our lifetime, but I think more so when it comes to the concept of knowing, you have to kind of build your own receipts. And so when I say receipts, it's like, okay, maybe you had this intuition about something. Maybe you had a knowing about something and you didn't say it. Okay, but you knew it. If you would have said it and it still happened, that would have been a receipt, right? But if it's something you're not feeling safe about expressing, that's completely understandable because not everybody has the freedom in their personal life or a safe space to express their belief system or their knowingness. And so, those receipts can be really helpful in moments of self-doubt. So,
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that idea and exercise. Do you keep a journal at all? That sounds like a good thing to like write your receipts down, right? When you had an intuitive knowing and then, journal about it so that you can go back and remind yourself when you have amnesia that you had this hit and you followed it and it worked.
Yes, especially because I think women especially, we tend to doubt ourselves. We're almost conditioned to because of like our historical experience around the concept of thought and education and knowing and things like that. We're often, the word crazy is thrown out for women like really recklessly if you think about it.
That's so true.
Yes. So one of the ways that I would express building confidence around your intuition, around your abilities would be to keep those receipts because personal experience is essentially qualitative data. We're doing our own work here to kind of add up and understand, okay, well, this is recurring. And it's not like someone who's a little addictive to synchronicities because we do see those people show up in the culture who are, oh, this is a coincidence, but this also happened. And a lot of times we can see that when people are really obsessive with things like angel numbers or things like that. We kind of have to be comfortable calling out some of that stuff too as, a spiritual community. But I would say that when we are looking at what is truth or what is scientifically proven or what is reason or logic, I look back at the Enlightenment era or the Age of Reason. And this was during probably like the 1700s was when the height of the Enlightenment era was occurring. And this is really where we're seeing this critical thinking coming out. It's very male dominated, Western thought dominated. People are expressing distrust in how the church has been controlling knowledge or controlling economic systems and governmental systems or influencing those things at the time. And they're seeing lots of corruption, and lots of greed issues. And they're really getting to the point where they're saying, well, I can't just randomly believe this stuff anymore. We need to question some of these things. And so while they were in the process of questioning those religions, were really questioning things that were created from a more male perspective. They were doing a service to try and create a better understanding of, well, what is logic? How do we prove something to be reasonable or truthful? This is where we have the birth of the scientific method. This is where we have the canonization of science, and really education is turning into something different than it has been, in prior cultures and prior centuries. And so we're having more discussion around thought and more discussion around, well, what really makes it credible, and I think during that part, a lot of more feminine, or I would say, when I say feminine, it's not necessarily female. I mean more receptive or cultural kind of elements might have been lost or split out during that time. And we have a lot of this very strategic thinking around math and measurement and data collection, which we needed. We really did need. But during that time when we were canonizing what actually is reason, what actually is logic and science, not a lot of women's voices were being heard. And in particular, a lot of the women during that era were saying, well, let's actually question how we're looking at religion. Let's question how we're understanding religion. Let's question these things instead of necessarily just eliminating them, because maybe we can learn something here about, how we're trying to turn everything into this like dual perspective of good and evil. Okay. And let's try to maybe enrich our understanding of these things from a little bit of a more diverse perspective. It's not necessarily natural science, but also a lot of these sciences came from like spiritual and holistic perspectives. Like astronomy is one of them, and geometry actually came from astronomy. And so if you look at astronomy, it actually was essentially just astrology. And during the 1700s, astronomy and astrology split ways, and they used to be one and the same. And so, for example, people for millennia had always looked to the stars to identify certain patterns and shifts for when certain things happen in their lives. They're the herds that were moving that they were following, or the crops that they needed to plant, or, women's cycles were synced with the moon, the 28-day cycle, right? And they still are. But they were very much more aware of their surroundings and how the sky translated into certain cultural knowledge that they needed to remember. And so metaphors and ways of remembering and understanding those things were used as a form of like storytelling. And that's really how astrology came to be. And before astrology split from astronomy, it really was just considered a way of relating for your specific region and culture. You would have stories tied to the stars to help you understand different things. And so that's why when you look at astrology, there's like 80 schools that are still existing, around the world. There's so many different ways of understanding the stars or mapping the stars. When it split and it turned into astronomy, it became more about measurement, distance, precision, navigation. And it lost all that cultural context that had been evolving and changing through years. And so really when we're seeing that Enlightenment era show up, we're seeing a lot of those more humanities-based or community-based forms of thought and spirituality being erased by that because of this real resistance to Western religion. And so a lot of voices around, well, let's bring some of those thoughts to the table. Let's try to understand how we can look at things as a little bit more diverse or different and learn from that kind of a perspective. Those voices were kind of shut down. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so we're missing out, I think, on some of that context because we actually lost it during that time frame by trying to organize and sort and label everything. There were good parts and bad parts.
Yeah, I feel like this ties into our conversation earlier about needing to respect the earth and the natural resources. And I just had this realization that if I would have grown up being told stories around the campfire about the stars in the sky, maybe I would have been more connected to earth. Instead, I was told to go work on the farm at 5 a.m. and I didn't want to. There was no sitting around with family or community and like being in awe of the earth. And then that's not creating our respect for the earth in an easier way.
And even in the way that we do farming nowadays, it's really coming from this more economic benefit than it is like a sustaining benefit. And so we do a lot of things to the soil that we're not going to benefit from in 30 years. And so it's like, all of that stuff is so new. We're such babies when it comes to how we're experiencing the earth, at least here in the States, having to go along with what you just said about farming during that era. And I think you were talking to me about the I Ching, time frame,
the human design time frame.
Yeah.
Yes. So, cause we're stepping into the great change for human design, which is in 2027. And the last time human design changed its incarnation cross into the cross of planning, I believe it was 1741, but it was at least the late 1700s. So this really coincided with the human design system of what we're stepping into now. So we've let the pendulum swing way to the left, way masculine. And now coming into 2027, hopefully, fingers crossed, we're bringing back in the feminine energy. And that's for everyone. This isn't gender. It's the masculine energy versus the feminine energy.
It's listening, it's learning, it's being receptive so that we can nurture how we interact with our environment around us. And it's not just about the earth, it's about each other too. And when we're seeing those moments happen during that enlightenment phase, which is when that you were talking about, when that last change occurred, where we're trying to label and sort and understand, that also happened to coincide with an era where we're trying to colonize so we can industrialize. That's where the birth of mercantilism occurred. And that's essentially economics today. And so really people were using the concept of knowledge in order to create control and to gather sources or resources for power. And so now, like you were talking about, this great shift that's occurring here, I think we're really on the verge of trying to understand individually how we can celebrate ourselves and how we can really share space in a more nurturing and really productive and healthy way.
Yes. And I think one of those is slowing down. That's, part of that receptive energy, that feminine energy. What is a way that you tap into that you just bring into your daily life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this was a really big challenge for me, Dayna. So here's an example. I bought a hammock for myself, but I never sat in it. I was like, no, I don't deserve to. I don't deserve. I haven't worked hard enough to be able to sit in that thing. And something as simple as that was hard for me to do, because we're so conditioned right now to try and move, do, hustle, hustle, hustle. And I think it has to do a lot of times for people, they have no choice, right? It's different resource wise. Your intersectionalities create different barriers for you. But I had to understand how functioning from this consistently masculine place of do, action, chaos, fight, chaos, kind of energy. It wasn't reflecting my wholeness. And there was this element of rest and receiving and observing and nourishment that I just thought that's ridiculous. That's not for people like me. Okay. And so it has been an incredible battle for me to feel comfortable stepping into doing these things. And it has taken me practice. And I will tell you, I actually had like a couple of breakdowns allowing myself to do things like that, and I really do feel like, and especially women, we have a lot put on our plate. We have a lot of expectations that there's just so much difference in how we're expected to manage things than men. And so one of the things that I've had to kind of understand is I need to trust that it's safe for me to be able to dive into that more feminine energy and know that it's okay to like let my guard down and trust. And I think that ties into my spirituality, because without having to prove everything, if I can just trust that something's going to unfold here, and if I can follow that journey, and if I can really be open to whatever this is that's happening and unfolding, just like how me understanding these mounds and what my place is in regards to the messages, if I can just follow that and be able to accept the journey and not necessarily the specific outcome, and know that I'll constantly be evolving and I'll constantly be changing, I feel that that's so much more helpful for my soul. And I have really grown to find this place of harmony in my life. It's still there are still some things I challenge myself on, because I'm not totally comfortable with everything. But I've only had a year's worth of practice of doing this new version of how I'm harmonizing and rebalancing things. And I think one of the biggest things is we are trying to be this like perfect version of ourselves. And we're constantly marketing this perfection and this like success. What even is that? But once we acknowledge that really the success is probably more so about, well, how am I finding happiness? What if our ancestors who really had to fight for survival, what if they're looking at us and saying, well, you don't have to consistently do this. Like, we want you to be able to relax. We want you to be able to celebrate life. We want you to be able to, embrace these wonderful, happy things. And I had a really hard time with embracing celebration. I even had a hard time with celebrating my birthday, things like that. Wow. And so it's like, okay, I had to kind of retrain my nervous system to trust that it was okay for me to experience things like pleasure and joy, and be able to allow myself to receive just because, not because there was a goal in mind. And I think that that is actually going to be part of our spiritual shift when this change occurs.
Yes. That is one big permission slip from your soul to your heart to back to your soul. And I feel like, if anything, let's just do it for our ancestors. If it's too hard to do for yourself, think of your ancestors, like you said, who lived to survive. And now we live in this world where we can actually thrive. We can rest. We can feel pleasure. We can be receptive. We need to slow down and we need to release control when we have our inner knowings, because oftentimes those inner knowings come with no answer of what's going to come of following that inner knowing, which has to be the most annoying thing on a spiritual journey ever.
Yes.
But to speak more to the great change as we're stepping into 2027, in human design, we're stepping into the right angle cross of the sleeping phoenix, which is all about the individual. So we were in the cross of planning for that 200 some years, which was all about structure. It was more left side, more masculine. And we needed it. We needed to put those structures into place while we were having these institutions to bring communities together and things like that. But we've let the pendulum swing way that way. And that's why over these past couple years, especially since 2020, things feel uneasy. This time, there's a lot of fear in the world. There's a lot of people having spiritual awakenings. There's a lot of people going, oh my gosh, I've been only living in my masculine. I've been on autopilot, go, go, go. I need to start figuring out what this feminine side is. There's women, especially, just stepping into their power, a new level of understanding of themselves, not only on their human level, but their soul level. And as we walk into 2027, we're stepping into that new energy for another cycle. And that's allowing that pendulum to swing back over to the right, more to the feminine side, realizing that if we step out of our way, stop listening to the shoulds of the homogenized world, look into whatever it is you can look into, whether that tool is human design or astrology or tarot or whatever spiritual journey, self-development you're on, to ask, who am I as an individual? All the good stuff, all the kind of stuff that maybe make me feel insecure or shameful. Like, we need to be ourselves. We need to be that one piece of the puzzle so we can get out of the way for that other human to be the piece of the puzzle. And as our consciousness is starting to raise, we're going to feel more and more connected with each other on an energetic level, because we are all one consciousness. We are all one breath or one heart. But we've been so separated by this past cycle. And now this new cycle coming in, yes, you'll be very individual on your own level, but I would argue that we're going to connect more and more in community because we're going to need to. And it's going to be absolutely beautiful. If we want the earth to thrive, if we want to thrive as technology gets faster, we're going to need to connect more.
Yes. And I love how you put that our individuality will almost be celebrated. And, it's like we're sharing this space as one. It's like, when you hear someone say like namaste, that means the divine in me honors the divine in you. And so if you think about it, the labels and the categorizations and all of the forms of thought that have helped us kind of evolve and grow over the past couple centuries here, yes, they brought a lot of value into our lives. But it's also one thing to cling to those structures to the point where they're actually identifying who you are, because then you're not actually identifying who you are as a soul, as a person, as your life here on this earth. You're not really understanding who you are and your values, because you're aligning them specifically with a system of understanding something. And so, so it's like, yes, we've done really great work trying to kind of leverage change, but also with this new shift, it's really all about allowing ourselves to exist just as humans and just sharing more so from a heart space. And one of the things that I was thinking about that kind of ties into that is, I know we were talking about the masculine and feminine in a non-gendered way, right? It's more energetic. Well, there is also an example of, gender and how it's been changed by this particular time frame as well. So prior to this shift during, the 1700s, we have cultures all around the world that were honoring people who were gender fluid. Okay, so either they didn't really have a gender or they walked in a way that their gender was a mesh of both feminine and masculine. And especially here in the United States, we had many First Nations cultures celebrated two spirit folks, which were folks that both held feminine and masculine qualities. And really, what's important to know about two spirit folks in the Indigenous community, in the Native American community, is they were upheld as extremely sacred because they had this breadth of knowledge from existing in two worlds, in the masculine form and in the feminine form. And they were actually seen as advisors. They were seen as spiritual advisors because they had this breadth of fluidity and knowledge that was very wise, and their perspective of how things were functioning was not so rigid. And so that kind of energy was celebrated. And here, even with more recent policy, we're seeing all of these rights of people who are starting to finally feel safe to come out as gender fluid. We're seeing their rights threatened. And so I do feel like part of that has to do with these labels that we work so hard to try and stamp on people and force them into. Because around the world, it has always been celebrated. Gender neutrality has always been celebrated, or gender fluidity has always been celebrated. And, you know, we're at this time frame now where there's just a lot of violence and hatred towards what people just don't understand.
So well put. It's just what people don't understand.
Yeah.
So the more that we can share and the more people can learn, the more that they can be exposed to people who are gender fluid or gender neutral and understand them and just be with them and feel their soul and feel their heart, then then it's okay. And I think it really starts with love. We can't hate on the people who don't understand it. You know, we can't hate on anyone. We have to send love to them so they feel safe and comfortable to ask questions or to learn or to admit how they're feeling, so that then they can love.
No matter how much we want to divide ourselves, we all have commonalities, whether we like it or not. And I think that this is really going to show up in how we start to hold space for each other and really care for each other in the coming years.
I feel so jazzed by this conversation. I'm like, Brandi, what do we do right now? Let's go march out of our houses and like take the streets.
Yeah. And I feel like we saw all these calls to action in 2020 in particular. And now a lot of the issues are kind of falling on deaf ears today because there was so much momentum and crisis and chaos during that time. Our attention was captivated. You know, we were forced to pay attention during that time because we were all kind of in this lockdown phase, right? And so now we're trying to kind of understand, well, how do we live a normal life? What does normal even mean? And I really have to say that there's this huge kind of battle happening right now over really like the soul or the spirit, especially in the United States, where we're seeing this confrontation around the concept of individual self-expression, truth telling, especially. So really, if you look at it, a lot of the answers we can find in the history that wasn't actually recorded. And so when we talk about who has power, it's the person writing the history, right? And a lot of that history from the States, especially in the Midwest or in the Western areas, was not necessarily documented by the people who have existed here for millennia. And so even I would challenge you, for example, to do something like this. Take a peek at your local historical society and see what kind of history or knowledge they offer or they share prior to like the 1830s when the Indian Removal Act occurred, because a lot of those like little towns or homesteads were being established by white settlers. And it was after the federal agents came to remove or murder Indigenous people. And so like I would challenge you to check out what your local historical society is doing. See if you can get involved in helping, you know, to educate or update maybe signage in your areas for landmarks, things like that, so that really we can really understand history from a true perspective and not necessarily who had the funding or the power of the pen to create that written piece. Because prior to the writing and the organizing and the sorting era that we were talking about, prior to all that written documentation equating to knowledge, equating to power, it was really more about oral storytelling. It was really more about sharing knowledge and sharing understandings verbally and through art or through actual functional culture. So those are some of the things you can do. You can also offer to get involved with organizations or try personally to learn from Indigenous people. Experience culture from a place of not necessarily like, oh, they're gone, they don't exist anymore. But I mean, watch the show Reservation Dogs on Hulu. It's just fantastic. There's so many ways you can kind of, and I love the way that they interlace the deep spiritual experiences of the people on that show into comedy. It's just like it's just so well done. So this is in regards to kind of retelling our history and redoing the narrative, because I think people are really scared to find out this like shadow side of our history. They're scared because it's vulnerable, it's humiliating, it's embarrassing. But the thing is, it's what we do with that knowledge and how we move forward that's going to be the most powerful piece. And if you're brave enough to face that fear, if you're brave enough to work with that true, transparent knowledge and do something better with it, then you're going to be just fine.
I love that. That's such a great call to action for all the listeners out there. I am totally going to check out Reservation Dogs.
So good.
I've never heard of it.
There's also a new movie, and it's called Killers of the Flower Moon, and it's based on a true story. And I think Leonardo DiCaprio is in that one. It's a new Scorsese film. So,
all right, head out to your local movie theater and go see that. Yeah, that sounds good. Oh, cool. Thank you, Brandi. You have shared so much wisdom today, and it's just so cool to hear from you. I've heard from other mediums in the past, but you're the only psychic that your work is being drawn to writing history, right? To the earth, to really helping out your community. And that's such a beautiful thing. And I'm so happy you took the jump from leaving your finance gig to going full-time mediumship and your business and tarot reading and your events, all those things, because you're clearly really sharing your gifts, which is needed. That's what the world needs, So if you have a gift out there that you're not sharing, like Brandi did it, you can do it too. Did you want to share any of your offerings or where people can find you?
Sure. And I just want to make one last comment too, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just coming from this place of fear and inaction, right? A lot of us are afraid to take action or afraid to say the wrong thing sometimes. I fully acknowledge I'm constantly learning. So I might have even expressed something in this podcast that might shift in the next several hours, Yes. And so if you can kind of look at yourself as ever evolving and just be okay with making mistakes and be along for the ride, I think you're going to be just fine. And when it comes to my offerings, yes, I offer my day-to-day readings through Zoom and email. And I also teach classes. I'll have some psychic skills classes as well as tarot classes. I just taught an astrology class. And I also mentor people who have abilities that are looking for better like forms of boundary setting, protection, looking for some reading techniques. I don't really do paranormal investigations. It's kind of a really case by case basis. And so I really try to stick with more so readings around shifts that people are experiencing in their lives, maybe some forks in the road that they've come to and they need some clarity or some perspective. So even though I am a medium, even though I can work with the dead, I don't necessarily advertise it as much because the grief work can be hard on me sometimes. I take a lot of that to heart. So it's something that is meaningful. It's very deep, but it's not something I typically advertise. So yeah, but if you want to bring me in for a private event as well, or if you have a small business and we share the same kind of value system, then I'd love to show up and do a pop-up for you and read tarot for some of your clients. Weddings, I do receptions. I'll read tarot at receptions. It's just been a total blast. I've just been along for the ride.
That is so cool. When you told me you do pop-ups for companies and weddings and stuff, I was like, yes, I feel like people are going to be wanting that more and more. And it sounds like so much fun.
It's really fun. Yes, it's been a blast and I'm here for it. And I'm just kind of allowing it to unfold as I need to.
Wow. So thank you so much, Brandi. You've taught me so much
Thank you,
today.
Dayna.
I've learned so much. I'm definitely feeling like I want to go put my feet on the ground and just thank Mother Earth for us being here and being able to be, living where our ancient ancestors have come and other indigenous cultures have lived as well. And just, it's humbling. It's very humbling. And I'm excited to stay in contact with you over these next couple of years and continue to watch
Absolutely.
what your work turns into.
And thanks for what you're doing, Dayna, as well, giving us all a voice, so that it's just really kind of normalizing this experience that so many people are having. Thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely. You're welcome. Ordinary Magic is a Lit Path Studios production, produced by Jamie Gale and Dayna Faye. Music is by Shane Ivers. Until next time, I wish you many powerful moments of ordinary magic.